Welcome to the Connected Campus Podcast, where we explore the ways that diverse professionals are working every day to optimize their efforts to recruit, retain, and graduate their students.
We are here in the final episode in our three-part series exploring aspects of a digital-first strategic plan. So as I've said before, there's so many things that could comprise a digital-first strategic plan, but we're just focusing on a few of what we feel are sort of the bigger areas or ones that we just wanted to focus on for this. And who knows, maybe we'll do more episodes on this in the future. But this series done in partnership with Pathify. And so we'll be talking about just kind of digital tools and how they're influencing, for this conversation today, digital community building. And I think we'll try to kind of flirt around like student community building, but also for faculty and staff and students and just everybody to kind of collaborate with one another. So we'll see what we can get to in the time that we have. Our guest today, friend of Higher Ed Geek and of Pathify, been on both podcasts. She avid podcaster herself and everything. But Josie, if you want to really quickly introduce yourself again, just kind of your professional background, and then we'll get to our conversation today.
Of course. Well, thanks for having me, Dustin. Hi, all. My name is Josie. Oh my gosh, time is weird. So I have been doing this work for the last 10 years. I worked on college campuses before that. I'm basically exploring the intersections of leadership and community building with technology, especially social media. And I do that as a speaker, consultant. I've got a book that's out there. And I'm just always up to some good trouble, including on podcasts with you.
Yeah, that's honestly, anymore. Like I host so much. So I'm just like, please, like have me on other shows. Cause it's like, I just like doing this kind of stuff and talking about it and, connecting these dots and sharing it with folks. And I think just in terms of like time doing the work nowadays, it's just like one thing I thought of is like, it's tough when you like start doing something on like an odd year. If it's like, oh yeah, what was it? It was like 2013 and what years? Like if it's easy, if it's like, oh, and 2010, and I could just like easily do the math of like, and then the pandemic just sort of throw everything for a loop. But I know you've been immersed doing this. You're somebody that I've always kind of admired. I think just bringing, with your doctorate, sort of the academic approach of research, really kind of deeply analyzing and bringing that sort of thoughtful perspective where I think topics like this, and certainly an aim of this content series is kind of bringing a little bit more substance. Can have a tendency to be a little sizzly, not so much steak there. It's very whatever the thing of the moment is, or just kind of going along with the hype. But the spirit of kind of the social internet or community building in digital spaces, I think can be kind of agnostic of any particular platform. Whether it is the Facebooks or the Twitters or X or the world. But you do have that privilege of certainly your kind of academic pedigree, and you work with institutions and leaders all across the country and everything. So we'll start very large, kind of 30,000 feet view. Like, what are you seeing right now across the country when it comes to institutions grappling with digital transformation, again, kind of in that lens of like community building? Because again, I feel like now it's like there's no shortage of tools or platforms or certain things where I know kind of when you started that was maybe not so much the case, but what are you seeing right now in terms of digital transformation around community building?
Yeah, so many tools. My podcast is coming back in a couple weeks, and I'm just like going through a status update of them all. And listen, so I do this work and I can't keep up. So I appreciate how, I don't know if I refer to myself with pedigree of scholarship, but I did have to earn my chops with, like my dissertation. And I do think it's so important before we get talking about technology as we stay grounded in what is it we're here for, who are our people, and what do we know that they need, whether if that is staff, faculty, or students. And so my work with community building is always grounded in belonging. We know that especially with student affairs, but also faculty, that is such a critical component of the work that we're here to do. So a student feels they belong. But we also know with data lately of retention of staff and faculty. We have such significant gaps in why we are losing really good people. And so I do think it's important to expand the conversation about how we build community in digital spaces beyond just students. So if you're ever feeling like all these tools swirl, 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 like remind yourself, like, well, what is it we are, the outcomes we're really focused on? And that's why I appreciate y'all are situating this in a strategic planning process coupled with digital transformation. Because to answer your question is, unfortunately, many institutions are still holding on so tightly to maintaining the status quo, getting back to where we were a few years ago. But they also are pretty incentivized and like, golden retriever energy of, oh, there's this technology tool over here, or we need an app, or we need a TikTok. And they're trying to do both. And we can't do that with the resources that you currently have allocated. So we'll just kick that off.
Well, and I think too, yeah, I mean, like you're saying, you are getting kind of like overwhelmed in the sense of like trying to keep track of anything. That's kind of like where the hype machine like gets in the way almost, is that like, TikTok could like suck all the air out of the room. And I think at this point we've seen that it's had some staying power just in terms of like, okay, that is like a space that, institutions don't necessarily have to be, but they should be aware of it and sort of like, making a very intentional choice of like, if they want to show up, and if so, then how, and those sort of things. And then if we're not making a profile, whatever else, just like kind of knowing like, okay, the trend of like the format of how people present themselves on there. It's like, maybe we can take some cues of kind of like adjusting a little bit of like, shorter form, or just more like dynamic, engaging, kind of fun, digital presence, however they're kind of creating that and everything. But yeah, I mean, I would imagine if you're feeling that way, a lot of other folks, institutional leaders are feeling the same way of just trying to kind of grapple with, what tools should we use, how should we use them, and not getting too distracted by like the next bright, shiny thing. Because yeah, there's just like, well, there is community building or anything else. There's no shortage of ed tech tools or other tools to be using and everything. So
Right.
I guess, do you like, if you had to summarize the feelings that you're getting as you're kind of like trying to talk about leadership and digital spaces and everything, like, what would be like the vibe that you're getting right now from those institutional leaders? Like, would it be that overwhelmed? Would it be confusion? Or because again, I think that dilemma is certainly one part of it, is like, how much do we sort of like go back to the status quo versus trying to do something new and different, a whole kind of blaze a trail that you've never been down before. Like, how do you kind of, what's the feeling that you're getting?
Oh gosh. I do think it's based on the institution and those they're serving, and whether if they have some leaders who have a digital mindset, but also a student-centered mindset. So many times, especially like when I'm working with a social media manager, let's say, they're getting strategy handed down from them from people that don't know what TikTok is and are telling them, no, this is what we have to do. And that's like a very small example versus create us a campus app. And it's just that it's not, well, like the why, or, so when I also say a student-centered leader, any of these tools, whether if it's TikTok or an app, you have got to include students in the planning process. Like, I want to see them on, the review committee of companies you're looking at to actually implementing it. And that sprinkles out in every single tool out there. Now, if the tool isn't made for students, then involve who that user is. Maybe it's something for HR, for staff, or if it's something for only online students. Like, do not forget your users in this, and not just like kind of rushing to that finish. Because the other thing that I do see is atrophy. We get tired of implementing a tech tool. So by the end, we're just like, can we just be done with it? Because in higher ed, sometimes we allow these projects to go on. And So honestly, that's where there's such multiple benefits for working like a tool like Pathify, where you have almost like think of it as your core curriculum that you can implement for these busy campus pros that like, does your IT really have time to make their own? I've seen some amazing ones, but is that really the best use of resources based on all your other infrastructure that you're working on within IT? And is it actually what students or your community want? Or is it just what you want?
Yeah, I mean that definitely I think is a paradigm that we are moving past. Is that it's like, well, we built it and it works well for us, and it's like, well, you kind of had a huge blind spot there. You need to be a little bit more conscious of all stakeholders, just more holistic, kind of comprehensive point of view. But yeah, I mean, I could absolutely understand, and thankfully, like, if you have the right perspective, you get away from that sort of like tunnel vision. It's like, well, we should just have this tool, or we should have a campus, like you said, it's almost just like laser focused, almost like, to a fault on just sort of like one piece of the solution versus it being like, well, we want it obviously to be something that is relevant and useful and, these sort of things, and like kind of really building out from there. It's like, well, what would we hope to achieve, and, different things like that, and bring people in, such as students, to evaluate whatever tool it is. So I could understand that sort of that feeling or that sentiment is like they just kind of, like you said, there's a lot on their plate as an institutional leader, certainly, if they're an IT leader at a campus. So they're almost like trying to just kind of like get from A to Z and like just jump over the rest of the alphabet or something, I guess is like a metaphor I thought of. So it's like, okay, well, let's like try to, think through what's going to be an efficient use of our resources, of our time, and all those sort of things. And I guess just from, to kind of build on your answer that you were just saying, like, just kind of get more detail. I feel like the ways that you could imagine institutions building community with a tool like Pathify, because I think there's a lot of things that's going to simplify and kind of get out of your way as a student and everything. So from your perspective, outsider looking in, what are the prospects of, something like this, and how it could sort of build community better for students in particular? Start there.
So we are living in the age of attention. And the reason why, for example, a student's attention goes to TikTok is because content is made for their enjoyment. The algorithm gives them or me what I want to see. I want to see what I want to get on the Sephora sale, or puppies, or, and that user experience sometimes gets lost in some of the things that we create, whether if it is us using that our own tool like Instagram that just gets filled with flyers and nobody wants to look at that. I think the second thing is getting users to adopt a new tool is not just like getting them to turn on, like download an app. Like you're gonna need to get a hook. And hopefully we could link this in the show notes. We have some data here from a recent survey from Student Voice. And this is like literally students telling us they want a campus events calendar. That could be a hook to get your students into your app. They want reminders. They want a central place to schedule. So like, as you're out there looking, like, and I know Pathify has lots of those things. So like, how can this fill a need that isn't just like the internet, the intranet? What's the one that people can't see that really staff and faculty only look at? Like, I'm sorry, students aren't going to your intranet. Anyway, this survey was really interesting, like live chat. And what you'll realize though is, oh gosh, this is where we have a disconnect with our own digital transformation, is that we don't have the support on the back end. I could see someday, just like you have a dean of students, you're going to need to have a dean of the digital experience, because to be able to to man the chat and to think about what that real transformative experience isn't just copying it and pasting it over in a digital space. Like, Coachella recently live streamed their entire weekend with YouTube. But again, it wasn't like just this weird camera on the side, because you all have seen a concert where you're like, I'm not supposed to be here and I'm just kind of lurking. But there was integration, there was multiple, and it probably cost a bundle, but people from around the world tuned in to that. I mean, just like probably our graduation ceremonies. And there is a cost for digital, or there might be more upfront costs for digital. But in that case, that's an example of scaling this beyond, you can only sell so many tickets for Coachella. Concerts are on my mind.
Well, yeah, I think that's like, it's an interesting kind of similarity. I think literally like campuses can do that for their speakers or events and stuff like that too, because I feel like not many have even started with the like, oh, okay, we have like a camera or whatever that's maybe just like zooming in or whatever, kind of like more static shots or whatever. So it's like, you'd hope that they'd be able to get to a point of like, it's like a Coachella concert when like, something like that's happening, or a concert on campus feels like, that level of production. But yeah, and it's even the idea of like, institutions almost have the privilege of the luxury of like, doing things that like, may be expensive and don't make sense, in the sense of like, we're doing this just because like we want to devote all of our research, like it doesn't behoove us to be like squirreling away, like, but it's like, you've got your endowment, you've got all that, like that's sort of the rainy day fund and everything. So it's like, put all of your sort of willpower and your effort and your resources, as much as you can into, like you said, building a very like sort of robust and intentional digital infrastructure and everything. As you're sort of building a digital first strategic plan, it's like that would probably include staff and people overseeing it and managing it and planning and all that. And thinking about like, opportunities. Yeah, if it's like, well, we have this amazing event going on, how can we try to get as many people connected to that as possible, because there's only so many seats in the auditorium, or it's available, just happening live at a particular time of day, and not everybody's available for that. It's like they could watch it on demand afterwards because we recorded it high quality and it's there and lives in a place where everybody's kind of coming together anyway, and then maybe people can chat about it in a group or something, like, because all the things that you're sort of saying, I'm like, yeah, like you'd want all of that to where it can be like one central place where people can find out what's going on in their life and also connect with people and everything. And it doesn't feel like things are disjointed, or they go there and it feels sort of flat, or it's not like there's none of those hooks or engagements or anything. Like it's the things that I want, the things that I need to know, the things that are useful to me, presented in a way that is customized. It's like, well, I want this over here, I want that over there, and those sort of things. So I think it's, that relevance is huge. And like with what you're saying too, in my mind, it's like, yeah, like obviously you can't be the only person at the party that's not a party. Like you have to get enough people at the party for then there to even be the ability to build community around anything. Like it could even be where it's like, this is the perfect digital experience, it has all the things that anybody would possibly ever need. And it's like, you actually forgot to like tell anybody about it. Like you forgot to promote the party, like that adoption piece. Like you really need people to be brought in. I think we've seen that partners that we work with, like that's sort of like, it can unfortunately be overlooked at a point. Like you put almost too much effort in building it that you forget to sort of do the diligence to sort of build up excitement. When, and certainly like with what you're saying, maybe have students be like, wow, this looks great, I'm going to tell all my friends about it or whatever. Like you can sort of build that kind of excitement as well, as much as you might do a sort of glossy campus-wide marketing campaign to get people to not just download the app, which that can be like a false sense of success. It's like, oh my gosh, look
The
how many people, download.
downloads,
It's like nobody ever like logged in or whatever. So I think those are all really important pieces. And I guess like any follow-up thoughts on that idea of like, because I think it's the sort of bifurcated strategy, because you have to build something relevant, engaging, but you also need to sort of like promote it, and that sort of balance, I guess, and sort of your perspectives on how leaders can try to balance those two priorities.
I think it needs to be integrated. It's now just what we do. How can it show up in every element that a student, staff, or faculty member would already be, like interacting both on campus and off? I think it'd be interesting to see some influencer marketing maybe being done as you're really trying to target specific groups, or based on your data, you might realize that, there's a certain demographic or student type that isn't, we just haven't gotten them in this app yet. And I think that could be an interesting approach. I'm talking a lot about influencer marketing lately, so that might be why I also talk.
No, I mean, yeah, I've seen you and some other folks like, because again, that's one of those things where I think like, influencers maybe where it's just like, it's sort of shallow and all that, like people just see like, again, sort of overproduced commercials for things that are presented to be not that way. But even just the idea of like influencer marketing in that sense of like kind of what I was getting at, like just like peer to peer,
Yeah,
like kind of like
totally.
let's kind of wash away that sort of notion. But that's sort of the spirit of it, is that like peers are going to be able to speak each other's language better than anyone else, and that can honestly
Mhm.
apply to staff or faculty too. Like they know the problems that they're
Right.
facing, and
Because
that
that's how
sort of
we
thing.
also know why, like, middle schoolers, look at them and what apps they're using. That's what's coming next. And how do they find out? It's not from the app store, it's from each other. And it spreads like, and that, while we aren't working with middle schoolers, like, we want that word of mouth among our students about this app, that it literally could be offline influencer marketing, that like you're incentivizing or encouraging like those groups to get it talking, because it can go a really long way.
Mhm. But I think I don't want to overlook, I think it's really good advice though, is that in the sense of like integrating, I'm going to take it sort of two sides of the coin with that word, because I think it's one of our
Oh,
favorite words to hear, by the way.
great. I used
But
it.
yeah, is like that idea of like, if you look and be like, wow, commuter students, off-campus students or whatever, like aren't downloading it. If you can like really kind of, this is like one of those things where it's like, okay, we've launched it, people are using it, great. But it's like, you have to keep that sort of energy going. And it may be that you really overlooked where it's like, okay, like those commuter students probably don't care as much about like the dining hall menu or something. It's like, can we bulk up in areas and integrate systems to present data that's going to make that when they log into their dashboard, it's really going to hook them.
Right.
They're really going to get that sort of kind of relevant information to them, and that like it could help you kind of look at that side of it, like so the technical integrations, and just be like, wow, commuter students really aren't downloading it. How could we do like a peer-to-peer sort of marketing,
Yeah.
for that audience in particular? So I think that's a really good
And
bit of advice in the
yeah.
sense of that, like you're not just totally overlooking a certain part of your digital community just because like they're the ones
Right.
that are on your physical community
And
space and campus.
the going to digital communities, I'm getting more excited about small communities. So for example, in the commuter group, there could be a hub just for commuters who can share, like, this is where the cheapest place to get gas is, or like, what podcasts are y'all listening to, or, oh, take this faculty member because he puts all his lectures on audio and I could listen on the way in. Like, those are because that's the other hook, is not just the thing like the events calendar that fills the need, but that's the sustainable part, is what actually keeps you coming back. And I think some micro commute versus like, oh, it's the class of 20 whatever. We find those are really popular at the beginning and then they fizzle out. And that's another topic, though. Part of the reason why is there wasn't a plan for it, and there wasn't moderators to think strategically, just like you would with curriculum or any other kind of training, that you would actually have some earmarkers throughout the year.
Yeah. I mean, and moderators too. I think like people who can be maybe like a year above or near peer folks to sort of model the way and everything is another good bit of advice in terms of digital community building and wherever that might be taking place. But yeah, I think long term micro communities is a way to really, like you said, sustain digital community, because you can get super specific and relevant. And I've heard examples of like for commuters, it's a good example I think to carry through, is like they really care about parking, and like some places they had like an integrated
Right.
digital parking interface where here's where the parking is, how many spaces are available, and
Yeah,
like
like a
so
mall.
like that was like
Uh-huh.
yeah, exactly, like that was a game changer for them, so they could know ahead of time
Where to
like
go.
where's the parking. And then if it's like if you had interfaces to at least like initiate an order from like the, and it's not like the dining hall, like somewhere else to like pick up food or something, like, and all those things are sort of presented to you and available in your mobile app or your web experience and those sort of things. So yeah, like that's where hopefully you can do as much of that work initially to serve all of those, different constituencies, whether it's on campus, hybrid, commuter, online, and all those sort of things. But those can be points of maturation. And maybe if you get feedback because you just weren't sort of cognizant of it as you were building the use of a digital tool like Pathify, you can start to have those be areas where it's like, awesome. Yeah. Like, come here to the table, commuter student, like tell us more. Like, okay, parking, you want like food ordering, you want like these sort of things, and I can help just sort of alleviate and not almost like put the burden or pressure completely on yourself or somebody else to speak for somebody else that they can't speak to, where it's like, oh, I would imagine that they might want this. Like you're trying earnestly to be inclusive of that mindset, but again,
could you imagine you could order your drink from like the student run coffee shop on your way into park, so then you could just grab it and then go to class? I mean, like Starbucks, right? And I think this is one of, I don't know if we're wrapping up soon. I know you were gonna ask me about like what's on the horizon, and my brain is just exploding, Dustin, from this conversation. I am both so excited but also a little worried, because what I also know about higher ed is we're competitive. We have to compete for students. And what we saw the last few decades was we were physically competing. So campuses were building lazy rivers and wild, like buildings, and our physical infrastructure, I think, is always going to be critical. But as we do spend more time and strategic planning with digital, if you don't do this strategic, it could become your lazy river. If it hasn't already, that you've gotten in with a partner or you've gone down a path that's going to be, and maybe wasn't really, do students really? I would love a lazy river on vacation, but I don't know if I need it. It looks great in the brochures. Because this is the other reality, though, that I understand why there's a lazy river. I understand why we're running after a lot of technology, is because we are having to compete against we're trying to reduce friction. I can order my Starbucks on my way to my appointment that I made on my phone to, like find a parking spot at my mall that I know exactly the level I'm going to go to, because I know on my app that there's a spot there for the movie that I fully booked an appointment, and I already pre-bought my popcorn. Like the list goes on and on and on. So we need to prioritize what is the friction that we can minimize in order to outcome, right? What's the deeper stuff? And that's where we bring it back to belonging or other big, like student success engagement metrics that we're really focused on. And not just to say like, oh, people can float on our lazy river and have our DoorDash delivered to them in their inner tube, which would be pretty cool. But what?
Well, no, and yeah, that's what like we've talked about is like, yeah, we're some institutions maybe have it in like smaller ways, or we're certainly on the precipice of that even being like a possibility of like the digital sprawl. Like you have too many tools, they're sort of not integrated with one another, and you could certainly see with like getting like VR or any other like kind of flashy tool where it's like, oh boy, we spent way too much money on building a whole virtual environment thing that wasn't necessary. Or like that idea of like, sure, there may be some friction about getting your coffee or this or that, but it's like, is that the area where your students are experiencing the most friction?
Right.
Like it may be some, but that also like, if students are saying, oh, I'm always late because I can never find parking, it's like, great, focus on that. It's like, are they maybe necessarily like failing their classes because they can't get their coffee in a few less minutes? It's like, probably not. But again, if it's always just trying to like marginally improve, it's like, check off again those big hairy audacious goals of like, okay, we really need to like bring together all these systems in one centralized dashboard, and build an events calendar because we really haven't had anything before. So yeah, I think that's a good check on people if they're getting all jazzed up about all the possibilities. It's like all in due time, and focus on what maybe is going to really make kind of gainful leaps towards student success and community building and all that. So I think at the time that we have, if there's quick thoughts that you have on sort of like kind of acknowledging, like, for faculty and staff, like they can certainly build community amongst themselves. And I know there's a lot of the folks that you work with and you bring together. So like, what have you seen as just sort of quickly, like, why is that important? Sort of like the folks working in an institution coming together to collaborate and doing that maybe like digitally and with different platforms and stuff.
I mean, because we're humans that happen to be working in higher ed, and there's lots of pockets of campus that have ignored the humanity, and we had many times would create it on our own, and or amongst so for example, like you and I met through Twitter, and there is almost like a grief process some people are going through because that platform has changed so much. And now they're like, where do I go? LinkedIn, Blue Sky, I don't know, just a group text. So I would say that investing in community for your staff and faculty should look different than students. It should not be a pizza party. Or just something that you do during the holidays. It should be pulled back to bigger strategic objectives, whether that's DEI and retention to program growth, that and it could come down to your bottom line, literally the cost it takes to have to recruit versus retain is much different. So I think staff and faculty want to play in some of the same spaces. If Pathify, if we are already trying to get staff and faculty to use that tool in their classes, in their programs, of course, like get them in it in another way. What is their hook? It might be parking. It probably is parking. It might be the events calendar, but I could see implementing this for specific groups. So for example, brand new employees, or again, like certain demographics, people that aren't from the area, that again, their hook is going to be that they're actually really looking for it. And then again, word of mouth can be just as strong with staff and faculty as students, both in good and bad ways. So if, again, go to your users and what they really need and what they're experiencing, because, goes same for staff too. So big thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it shows a level of care as an institution and its employees who are human beings. If you're encouraging, you're welcoming, creating these sort of spaces and those sort of things for them to socialize and collaborate, and that, you're kind of making that space for them to like work for the betterment of the institution as well, to say like, hey, we can get you all together, in these spaces, you share your thoughts, your feedback, and those sort of things. So that's really great. All right, so we will wrap then. You gave a little glimpse at the horizon, but this I feel like would be a really good place to end it, and kind of bold, circle, underline, highlight. How does digital community building help support student retention?
Check my dissertation. No, I'm just kidding. It is part of the toolkit of the full student experience. It is not just an add-on. It is an essential ingredient that we have to put time, resources to.
Yeah. I mean, that peer-to-peer support and everything is, I don't know, it can be magic sometimes, because especially if you create an environment where people know like, oh, that's right, I saw this over here, go check with this person to go, check this out. Like it can be really impactful. And even if it's just for the sake of socialization and fun and those sort of things, like, we're all humans, whether we're students or faculty and staff. So making the space, making the time, investing in digital community building is important and crucial. And I appreciate you coming on to talk about it and sharing all of your expertise and wisdom and everything. We'll have ways to connect with you and the work that you do in the show notes, as well as the study that you mentioned. So always good talking to you.
You too, Dustin.
Thanks for listening to The Connected Campus. Please leave a 5-star review for the show and share it so others can discover us. Make sure to also subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode of The Connected Campus.